Marcus Chen had always preferred the sky to solid ground. At 15 years old, he'd learned to walk in the clouds long before most kids learned to drive. Not in reality, of course, in the hyper-realistic world of flight simulators that had consumed his life for the past 4 years. As he settled into seat 14C of American Airlines Flight 447, Marcus felt the familiar thrill of anticipation coursing through his veins. Los Angeles to Denver. 2 hours and 13 minutes of flight time. He'd flown this exact route 247 times on his computer at home, always in a Boeing 737-800, always departing from LAX's runway 25R, always landing on Denver's runway 16R. He knew every air current, every weather pattern, every potential complication this route could throw at a pilot. "Marcus, honey, put your phone away," his mother, Linda Chen, said softly beside him. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes from their week-long visit to his grandmother in Orange County. Her mother, Marcus's beloved Nai, was battling stage 3 cancer, and the weight of that reality hung heavy on both of them. "Just one more minute, Mom," Marcus replied, his fingers flying across his phone screen. He was checking his flight simulator stats one last time. 3,247 hours logged, 892 perfect landings, 156 emergency scenarios completed. His friends at school thought he was obsessed. His father, before he'd left 3 years ago, had called it a complete waste of time that won't get you into college. But Marcus didn't care. When he was in that virtual cockpit, he wasn't the awkward kid who got picked last in gym class. He wasn't the son of a broken home. He wasn't the teenager who struggled to talk to girls or make friends. He was Captain Chen, master of the skis, commander of a machine that defied gravity itself. The flight attendants began their safety demonstration. Marcus barely paid attention. He'd memorized every word, every gesture. He knew that the oxygen masks would drop from the overhead compartment if cabin pressure dropped below 14,000 feet. He knew that the nearest emergency exit was 2 rows behind him. He knew that in the unlikely event of a water landing, this Boeing 737-800 could theoretically float for up to 45 minutes if the cabin remained intact. He knew things that most passengers never thought about, things that kept them blissfully ignorant and relaxed as they hurtled through the air at 500 miles per hour, 7 miles above the earth. As the plane began taxiing toward the runway, Marcus pulled out his earbuds but didn't put them in yet. Instead, he pressed his forehead against the cold window, watching the ground crew scatter like ants as the massive aircraft rolled past. The wings stretched out before him, a marvel of engineering, aluminum alloy skin over titanium ribs, designed to flex up to 12 feet in turbulence without breaking. His mother noticed his intensity. "You really love this stuff, don't you?" Marcus turned to her, surprised by the question. She rarely acknowledged his passion. "Yeah, Mom, I really do." Linda Chen studied her son's face, so much like his father's, with those same intense dark eyes that could focus on something for hours without blinking. "Your teacher called again last week, said you're failing social studies because you spend all your time drawing airplane diagrams in class." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. Here it comes, he thought, the lecture. But his mother surprised him. After seeing Nai this week, after watching her fight so hard for every breath, she paused, her voice catching. "Life's too short to not pursue what you love. I'm sorry I've been hard on you about the simulator stuff." Marcus blinked, unsure if he'd heard correctly. "Really? Really? When we get home, we'll look into real flying lessons. Maybe a discovery flight at the local airport. It's expensive, but we'll figure it out." For the first time in weeks, Marcus felt genuine happiness bloom in his chest. "Mom, that would be..." The engines roared to life, cutting off his words. The 737 began accelerating down the runway, and Marcus instinctively noted the details. V1 speed at 150 knots, rotation at 165, liftoff at 180. He felt the exact moment the wheels left the ground, that magical instant when tons of metal defied nature and climbed toward the heavens. Lowe's angels spread out beneath them, a sprawling grid of dreams and concrete, palm trees and traffic, the Pacific Ocean glittering like scattered diamonds in the morning sun. Marcus watched it all shrink away, his heart soaring with the aircraft. At 10,000 feet, the seatbelt sign dinged off. Passengers around them relaxed, pulling out laptops and books. A businessman across the aisle ordered a Bloody Mary. A toddler 3 rose up, giggled at something on an iPad. The world continued its normal rhythm, everyone trusting that the two pilots behind that locked cockpit door knew exactly what they were doing. Marcus pulled out his phone and opened his simulator app, scrolling through his aircraft collection. He'd purchased every single Boeing 737 variant, spending months of allowance money to get the most realistic physics engines and cockpit recreations. His favorite was this exact model, the 737-800, capable of carrying 189 passengers, with a range of 3,115 miles and a service ceiling of 41,000 feet. Such a beautiful machine, he murmured to himself. His mother had already dozed off, her head tilted against the window. Marcus smiled and draped his jacket over her shoulders. She'd been so strong this week, holding Nai's hand through chemo sessions, never crying in front of her, always the dutiful daughter. As the plane leveled off at 30,000 feet, Marcus felt completely content. The gentle hum of the engines, the subtle vibrations through the fuselage, the pressurized cabin air, it all felt like home. He had no idea that in exactly 43 minutes, his entire world would shatter. He had no idea that his useless obsession would become the only thing standing between 148 people and death. He had no idea that the next 2 hours would transform him from an awkward teenager into a national hero. The plane cut through the crystal blue sky, steady and sure, carrying its precious cargo of unsuspecting souls toward a date with destiny. And Marcus Chen, the boy who lived in the clouds, was about to discover whether his dreams were substantial enough to save real lives. Marcus was scrolling through photos of Nai on his phone when the first shutter hit. It wasn't the normal turbulence he'd experienced dozens of times before, those gentle bumps that made drinks slosh and nervous flyers grip armrests. This was violent, primal, wrong. The entire aircraft lurched downward as if some invisible giant had swatted it from the sky. Marcus's stomach flew into his throat. His phone shot from his hands and clattered somewhere under the seats ahead. Around him, passengers gasped in unison, a chorus of shock and fear. Marcus, his mother jerked awake, her eyes wide with confusion and terror. Before he could answer, the plane dropped again, harder this time. The overhead bins rattled violently. A carry-on bag broke free and tumbled into the aisle. Someone screamed. Then everyone was screaming. Marcus's simulator training kicked in automatically, his mind cataloging details even as panic threatened to overwhelm him. Severe turbulence, rapid altitude loss, unusual pitch angle. His hands gripped the armrests as he stared out the window, analyzing what he saw with the clinical detachment of countless virtual emergencies. The wing flaps were wrong, completely wrong. They were extended asymmetrically, the left side down 15 degrees more than the right. That shouldn't be possible. The fly-by-wire system had multiple redundancies specifically to prevent that kind of imbalance. It meant either catastrophic systems failure or. He didn't want to think about the or. Coffee erupted from a cup 3 rows ahead, spraying the ceiling in a brown arc before raining down on terrified passengers. A flight attendant stumbled through the aisle, barely catching herself on a seat back. Her carefully styled hair had come loose, and her face, normally a mask of professional calm, showed raw fear. Everyone remain seated. Keep your seatbelts fastened. Her voice cracked on the last word. The seatbelt sign dinged on, the chime absurdly cheerful against the chaos. But what chilled Marcus to his core was what didn't happen next. No captain's voice came through the speakers. No reassuring explanation about unexpected rough air or minor technical difficulties. Nothing but the screaming of stressed metal and terrified passengers. "Mom, something's really wrong," Marcus said, adding how young and scared his voice sounded. Linda Chen clutched his hand so tightly her nails dug into his skin. "It'll be okay. The pilots know what they're doing. They're trained for this." But Marcus kept watching through the window, his simulator knowledge screaming warnings his conscious mind didn't want to accept. The descent rate was too steep, at least 1,500 feet per minute, maybe more. At this rate, they'd be at 15,000 feet in 10 minutes. They were over the Nevada desert now, he calculated, nowhere near any suitable emergency landing sites. A businessman across the aisle was praying in Hebrew, his voice rising and falling in desperate rhythm. Behind Marcus, a baby wailed inconsolably. A teenager, probably Marcus's age, had his eyes squeezed shut, tears streaming down his cheeks as he clutched a cross necklace. Another violent shudder rocked the plane. This time, Marcus heard something that made his blood run cold, a grinding sound from deep within the aircraft's systems, metal on metal. Something fundamental was failing. The head flight attendant, her name tag read Jennifer Rodriguez, emerged from the forward galley. Her mascara had run, leaving dark tracks down her cheeks. She carried a phone handset connected to the aircraft's internal system, and she was talking rapidly, her free hand gesturing frantically. Marcus unbuckled his seatbelt, earning a sharp gasp from his mother, and leaned into the aisle, straining to hear. Jennifer was only 3 rows ahead, and in the relative quiet between screams, fragments of her conversation drifted back. Not responding to any commands. Both of them, yes, I'm sure. Oxygen system, we think, but 15,000 feet and dropping. Oh God, what do we do? Both of them, Marcus's mind raced. Both pilots. That was impossible. Pilots were trained to never eat the same meals, to stagger their breaks, to ensure at least one was always functional. What could incapacitate both simultaneously? Carbon monoxide. No, the sensors would trigger. Hypoxia from rapid decompression. But his ears hadn't popped. Food poisoning, too fast, heart attacks. Lightning doesn't strike twice, unless... His simulator brain supplied the answer. Contaminated oxygen system. If something toxic had gotten into the cockpit's oxygen supply, and both pilots had been using supplemental O2 during cruise, maybe due to mild hypoxia symptoms they were investigating, they could have both been exposed simultaneously. It was rare, almost unheard of, but not impossible. Marcus looked out the window again. They'd dropped below the cloud layer now, and the Nevada desert stretched out below them like cracked brown leather. Mountains jutted up in the distance, the Ruby Range, if he remembered his geography correctly, beautiful and completely unforgiving. Jennifer Rodriguez stumbled past, still on the phone, still desperate. Marcus caught more words. ATC says we need a pilot now. No one on the crew has training. Coordinate with ground, but we need someone who can fly. The plane shuddered again, and this time the oxygen masks dropped. They fell from the overhead compartments like dying flowers, dangling and swaying as passengers screamed louder. The woman beside the businessman started hyperventilating. A college-aged girl was sobbing into her boyfriend's shoulder. An elderly man clutched his chest, his face gray. Marcus stared at the oxygen mask swinging in front of his face. In the simulator, this was always the beginning of the worst-case scenarios. Mask drop meant catastrophic pressure loss or emergency descent, but they weren't at high enough altitude for pressure to be the primary concern. This was precautionary, the crew preparing for the possibility of having to descend below 10,000 feet where supplemental oxygen wouldn't be necessary. Or preparing for the worst. His mother grabbed a mask and held it to her face with shaking hands. "Marcus, put yours on." But Marcus couldn't move. His eyes were fixed on Jennifer Rodriguez, who had stopped walking. She stood frozen in the aisle, the phone handset pressed to her ear, her face transformed by something between hope and absolute terror. Then she slowly turned toward the passenger cabin, scanning the faces, and Marcus knew with the certainty of nightmare becoming reality, what she was about to ask. The question that would change everything. The question that would transform a teenage boy's bedroom hobby into a matter of life and death for 148 souls. Jennifer Rodriguez raised the phone handset away from her ear. She drew a shuddering breath, and then, in a voice that barely held together, she called out the words that made time stop. "Is anyone on this plane a pilot? Please, if anyone has any flight experience at all, identify yourself immediately." The cabin fell silent except for the baby's crying and the terrible grinding sound from somewhere deep in the aircraft's wounded systems. And Marcus Chen, 15 years old, with 3,247 hours of flight simulator experience and exactly 0 hours of real flight time, felt the weight of 148 lives suddenly rest on his shoulders. The silence after Jennifer's desperate plea was deafening. It hung in the recycled air like a physical thing, heavy and suffocating. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears, so loud he was sure everyone around him could hear it too. 1 second passed, 2, 5. Nobody moved. The businessman across the aisle stared at his lap, his prayer beads wrapped around white-knuckled fingers. The college couple 3 rose up, clutched each other tighter. An elderly woman near the front sobbed quietly into a handkerchief. Everyone was waiting, hopping, for someone else to be the hero. Marcus felt his mother's grip tighten on his arm. When he turned to look at her, he saw something in her eyes that made his chest constrict. She knew. Somehow, impossibly, she knew what he was thinking. "No," Linda whispered, shaking her head. "Marcus, no, you're just a child." "Mom, you've never flown a real plane, never even sat in a real cockpit." Her voice rose, panic bleeding through. "This is nothing like your computer games. These are real people, real lives." Marcus looked around the cabin, the young mother desperately trying to calm her screaming infant. The teenager his age, frozen in terror. The elderly couple holding hands, probably married 50 years, facing death together. The flight attendants, Jennifer and 2 others, standing in the aisle with tears streaming down their faces because they all knew, that without a pilot, this plane was a coffin hurtling toward the desert floor. "I know, Mom," Marcus said quietly. His hands were shaking so badly he had to clench them into fists. "I know it's not the same, but I'm the only chance they have." "You don't know that, maybe someone else." "There is no one else." Marcus's voice cracked. "If there was, they would have already come forward." Jennifer Rodriguez's voice cut through the cabin again, more desperate now, barely holding together. "Please, I'm begging you. If anyone has any aviation experience, military, private pilot, flight instructor, anything, we need you now." Still, nobody moved. Marcus felt something shift inside him. It wasn't bravery, not the kind from movies where heroes stride forward with confidence and square jaws. This was something rawer, more terrifying. It was the awful realization that inaction had a cost, that staying silent meant watching 148 people die, including his mother, including himself. His father's voice echoed in his memory. "A complete waste of time that won't get you into college." His teacher's disappointed sigh. "Marcus, you need to focus on real-world skills." His former best friend's mocking laugh. "Dude, it's just a video game. It doesn't mean anything." But it did mean something. It had to mean something. Marcus unbuckled his seatbelt. The click seemed impossibly loud in the tense silence. Marcus Chen, you sit back down right now. His mother's voice was pure maternal terror. But Marcus was already standing, his legs shaking so badly he had to grip the seat back for support. Every eye in the visible cabin turned toward him. He saw the emotions flicker across their faces. Confusion, disbelief, a desperate hope that died as soon as they registered how young he was. His voice came out as a squeak. He cleared his throat and tried again. I might be able to help. Jennifer Rodriguez whipped around, her eyes widening. She stumbled toward him, nearly falling as the plane shuddered again. Are you a pilot? No, the word came out firm, clear. But I've flown this exact plane, the Boeing 737-800, thousands of hours in a professional-grade flight simulator. I know every system, every procedure, every emergency protocol. The hope that had flickered in Jennifer's eyes dimmed. Behind Marcus, someone laughed, bitter, disbelieving. A video game. The businessman across the aisle stood up, his face red with anger and fear. You want to bet all our lives on a goddamn video game? Sir, please sit down, Jennifer began, but the man wasn't finished. He's a kid, a child, playing pretend on his computer. He turned to the other passengers, his voice rising to a shout. Is this a joke? Is there really no one else? No military pilots, no flight instructors, just this teenager with his Xbox. Marcus felt his face burning. Shame and fear warred inside him. The man was right. He was just a kid, just a gamer, just someone who'd never felt real turbulence, never smelled jet fuel, never experienced the weight of actual responsibility. I crashed my first 50 landings, Marcus heard himself say, his voice barely above a whisper. In the simulator, 50 times I destroyed the plane and killed everyone on board. He looked up, meeting the businessman's eyes. But I learned from every single crash. I studied accident reports. I practiced emergency procedures until I could do them blindfolded. I've flown this plane through engine failures, hydraulic losses, electrical fires, wind shear, and worse. In a game, the man spat. In the most realistic training environment available outside of actual pilot certification, Marcus shot back, surprising himself with the force in his voice. The same simulator that real pilots use for training. Jennifer Rodriguez grabbed Marcus's arm. Up close, he could see the tiny lines around her eyes, the gray in her roots, the wedding ring on her finger. She had a life, a family, people waiting for her to come home. Can you really do this? She asked, her voice barely audible. I need the truth, Marcus. Can you land this plane? Marcus thought about lying, about saying yes with confidence, projecting certainty he didn't feel. But these people deserved honesty. I don't know, he said. I've never done it for real, but I've studied every inch of this aircraft. I know the weight and balance calculations. I know the approach speeds and landing procedures. I know what to do if the hydraulics fail or if we lose an engine. He paused, his throat tight. I might crash. I might kill everyone on board, but if nobody flies this plane, we're definitely going to crash. So the question isn't whether I can do it. The question is whether you'd rather die for certain or take a chance. The cabin was silent again, but this time it was different. This time it was the silence of a terrible calculus, of people weighing certain death against improbable survival. The elderly woman near the front spoke up, her voice steady despite her tears. Let the boy try. This is insane, the businessman protested. My grandson plays those flight simulators, the woman continued. He showed me once. They're incredibly detailed, more realistic than any game I've ever seen. She looked directly at Marcus, and in her eyes he saw something that gave him strength, trust. I believe in you, young man. Others began nodding, murmuring agreement. Not everyone, some faces showed naked terror at the idea, but enough to matter. Marcus's mother stood up beside him. She was crying, her face pale, but she placed both hands on his shoulders and turned him to face her. I was wrong, she said. It wasn't a waste of time, it was preparation for this moment. She kissed his forehead. Go save us, baby. Go show them what you can do. Jennifer Rodriguez took Marcus's hand. Her palm was slick with sweat, trembling against his. Come with me, she said. As Marcus stepped into the aisle, the plane lurched again. Through the window, he caught a glimpse of the altimeter display on someone's aviation app, 13,400 feet. They were running out of time. They were running out of sky. And Marcus Chen, the boy who lived in the clouds, was about to find out if his dreams were real enough to save 148 lives. Or if they were just vapor, dissolving at the first touch of reality. The walk to the cockpit was the longest 20 feet of Marcus's life. Each step felt like wadding through concrete. His legs trembled. His vision narrowed to a tunnel. Behind him, he could feel the weight of 148 pairs of eyes burning into his back, some hopeful, some terrified, some probably praying he'd suddenly announce this was all a mistake, that a real pilot would materialize from thin air. Jennifer Rodriguez held his hand, not guiding him but clinging to him, as if he were a lifeline instead of a 15-year-old boy way out of his depth. The emergency oxygen, she said as they reached the galley, her voice mechanical, rehearsed from training she'd probably never expected to use. It activated automatically in the cockpit. That's when we realized. She couldn't finish the sentence. Another flight attendant, Marcus saw her name tag read Patricia Mills, was standing guard at the cockpit door. Her makeup was smeared, mascara running in twin rivers down her cheeks. When she saw Marcus, her expression crumbled. He's just a baby, Patricia whispered. He's what we have, Jennifer replied sharply. Then softer, he's all we have. Patricia's hand shook as she entered the security code. The lock clicked. The reinforced door, designed to withstand terrorist attacks, designed to keep passengers out, swung open. Nothing in Marcus's 3,247 hours of simulation had prepared him for what he saw. Captain Williams was slumped over the control column, his body weight pushing the yoke forward, which partially explained their descent. His captain's hat had fallen off, revealing thinning gray hair matted with sweat. His face was the color of old newspaper, gray, lifeless, wrong. Vomit stained his white uniform shirt. First Officer Davis had collapsed sideways in his seat, held upright only by his shoulder harness. He was younger, maybe early 30s, and his hands were still reaching toward something, the oxygen mask, Marcus realized. He'd known something was wrong, had tried to save himself, hadn't been fast enough. The oxygen masks hung from the ceiling like deflated balloons, still hissing slightly with emergency oxygen that had come too late. Warning lights blazed across every panel. Red, amber, yellow, a Christmas tree of catastrophe. The master caution lights flashed urgently. The altitude alert chimed repeatedly, a sound Marcus had heard 1,000 times in his headset but never imagined would be so loud, so insistent, so terrifying in reality. "Oh God," Marcus breathed. His knees buckled. Jennifer caught him. "Stay with me," she commanded, her voice cutting through his shock. "Can you fly this plane or not?" The cockpit smelled wrong. Sweat and vomit and something chemical, the emergency oxygen, maybe, or hydraulic fluid or his own fear. The instrument panels glowed with an alien light. Every surface was covered in switches, buttons, knobs, screens. He knew them all by position and function, but seeing them here, real and three-dimensional and mattering in a way that pixels never could, was overwhelming. Marcus's vision swam. This wasn't his bedroom, wasn't his comfortable gaming chair with the cup holders and the surround sound speakers. This was a machine hurtling toward Earth at 1,500 feet per minute, with 148 lives depending on circuits and hydraulics, and his shaking, inadequate hands. "I can't," he whispered. "I can't do this, I'm not." The radio crackled to loud life. "American 447, this is Denver Center, urgent traffic, descend and maintain." A pause. Flight 447, you are deviating from assigned altitude. Respond immediately. The controller's voice was professional but edged with concern. Routine concern. He didn't know yet. Didn't understand that the cockpit was a nightmare, that both pilots were gone, that a child was about to tell him the world had turned upside down. Jennifer shook Marcus hard. Look at me. Her face was inches from his, her eyes fierce. I have 2 daughters, 8 and 11 years old. Patricia has a son graduating high school next month. Captain Williams has grandchildren he babysits every Tuesday. Her voice cracked but didn't break. You said you know this plane. Prove it. Right now. Prove it or we all die in the next 10 minutes. Something in her words penetrated the panic. Not the guilt trip. Marcus was already drowning in guilt. But the specificity. 2 daughters, 8 and 11. A son graduating. Grandchildren on Tuesdays. These weren't just passengers. They were someone's entire world. Just like his mom was his entire world. Marcus thought of Nai fighting cancer, waiting for them to come home. Thought of his little sister who'd begged to come on this trip but had stayed home for a school play. Thought of his mother's words, "Go save us, baby." He pulled free from Jennifer and stepped toward the pilot's seats. "Help me move him," Marcus said, his voice steadier than he felt. "We need to get the captain away from the controls." Jennifer and Patricia wrestled Captain Williams's limp body away from the yoke. His head lolled backward, and for a terrible moment Marcus thought he was dead. But then he saw the shallow rise and fall of the captain's chest. Alive. Barely. They dragged him out of the seat, much harder than it looked in movies. He was heavy, deadweight, and the cramped cockpit made everything awkward. Finally, they managed to pull him through the door into the galley. Marcus dropped into the captain's seat. It was still warm. The yoke felt different than his simulator's plastic controller, heavier, more resistant, more real. The rudder pedals were positioned for someone with longer legs. Everything smelled like the captain's cologne and sweat. The artificial horizon showed they were in a 5-degree nose-down attitude. Airspeed, 287 knots, too fast for their current configuration. Altitude, 12,800 feet and dropping. Vertical speed, minus 1,650 feet per minute. Marcus's hands moved to the controls, years of muscle memory taking over. His right hand found the yoke. His left reached for the throttle quadrant. His feet settled on the rudder pedals. And suddenly, impossibly, it felt familiar. The radio crackled again. American 447, Denver Center. You are now at 12,500 feet, outside assigned altitude. Respond immediately or we will scramble emergency. Marcus grabbed the radio transmitter with a shaking hand. He pressed the button. Static hissed. Denver Center. His voice came out high, young, terrified. He cleared his throat and tried again. Denver Center, this is American Airlines Flight 447. We have an emergency situation. Flight 447, state your emergency. Marcus closed his eyes for half a second. This was it. The moment everything became real. No going back. No reset button. No second chances. He opened his eyes and stared at the instrument panel, his old friend, his familiar territory, now his only hope. Denver Center, both pilots are incapacitated. I repeat, both pilots are unconscious and unresponsive. I'm a passenger, 15 years old. I have extensive flight simulator experience on this aircraft type but no real flight time. He paused, hearing how insane it sounded. I'm the only person on board with any aviation knowledge. I need immediate assistance. The silence that followed lasted 3 seconds. It felt like 3 years. Then, say again, Flight 447. Did you say 15 years old? Affirmative, Denver. I'm a kid, but I'm all you've got. Another pause. Marcus could imagine the chaos erupting in the control tower, supervisors being called, emergency protocols being pulled up, someone probably thinking this was a sick joke. Then a different voice came through, older, female, calmer. Flight 447, this is Sarah Mitchell, Senior Controller. Son, I need you to listen very carefully to my voice. First, take a deep breath. Can you do that? Marcus sucked in air, realized he'd been barely breathing. Good, Sarah said. Now tell me what you see on your instrument panel. Marcus's eyes scanned the displays. His simulator training gave him the vocabulary. Master caution light is on. We're at 12,600 feet, descending at 1,650 feet per minute. Airspeed 285 knots. Autopilot is disengaged. Heading 95. We're in a shallow descent with asymmetric flap extension. Stop, Sarah interrupted. You're reading instruments, that's good, that's very good. Now Marcus, that's your name, right? Marcus. Yes, ma'am. Marcus, have you found the autopilot panel? His eyes snapped to the mode control panel, upper center console, exactly where it had always been in his simulator. Yes, ma'am, I see it. I'm going to help you engage the autopilot to stop this descent. Can you do that with me? Marcus's hand hovered over the controls. This was it. His first real action as pilot. If he screwed this up, pressed the wrong button, entered the wrong altitude, confused the flight management computer, they could enter an uncommanded bank or pitch that he wouldn't be able to correct. But if he did nothing, they'd be at ground level in 7 minutes. I'm ready, Marcus said. And with Sarah Mitchell's calm voice guiding him from 200 miles away, Marcus Chen reached out and touched the controls of American Airlines Flight 447. The boy who lived in clouds was about to find out if he could save them. Marcus, first thing first, we need to stop that descent. Sarah Mitchell's voice came through the headset like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. Look at the autopilot mode control panel. Do you see a button labeled Alt-Hold? Marcus's eyes darted across the panel. His bedroom simulator had prepared him for this exact moment, but the real buttons seemed smaller, more numerous, more consequential. His finger trembled as it hovered over the controls. I see it, he said, upper center next to the heading select. That's right. Before you press it, I need you to check something. What's your current vertical speed? Marcus glanced at the vertical speed indicator. The needle pointed firmly downward, minus 1,680 feet per minute. And altitude? 12,400 feet. They dropped another 200 feet in the 30 seconds he'd been talking. His heart hammered against his ribs. Behind him, Jennifer Rodriguez stood frozen in the cockpit doorway, her hands clasped together like she was praying. Through the opening, Marcus could see Patricia and another flight attendant trying to revive Captain Williams. The elderly pilot's face was still gray, his breathing shallow. Okay, Marcus, listen carefully, Sarah continued. I want you to gently, and I mean gently, pull back on the yoke until your vertical speed shows about minus 500 feet per minute. Don't overcorrect. Small movements. Can you do that? Marcus wrapped both hands around the yoke. It was heavier than his simulator controller, with real hydraulic resistance. He pulled back slowly, feeling the nose of the aircraft begin to rise. The vertical speed indicator started climbing from minus 1,680 towards zero. Easy, Sarah coached. You're doing great. What's your vertical speed now? Minus 890 feet per minute. Keep going gently. Marcus continued the back pressure. The yoke felt alive in his hands, fighting him with every degree of pitch change. In his simulator, it had been smooth, predictable. This was raw, mechanical, terrifyingly real. Minus 620, minus 540, minus 510 feet per minute, Marcus called out. Perfect, hold it right there. Now press the Alt-Hold button. Marcus's finger found the button. He hesitated for just a fraction of a second. This was the moment, the commitment, the first real command he would give to a machine carrying 148 lives. Then he pressed it. A light illuminated next to the button. Alt-hold engaged. Immediately, Marcus felt the yoke pressure change. The autopilot took over, commanding the aircraft to maintain 12,100 feet. The nose came up slightly, finding the perfect pitch angle. The descent stopped. The vertical speed indicator settled at 0. They were level, not climbing but not falling either, holding steady at 12,100 feet above the Nevada desert. It worked, Marcus breathed, unable to believe it. We're level, the autopilot has it. From the cabin behind him, he heard someone cheer. Then another. Then a ripple of applause broke out, tentative, disbelieving, desperate with hope. Excellent work, Marcus. Sarah's voice carried genuine relief. You just saved everyone's life for the next few minutes. Now we need to make sure you can keep them alive for the next hour. The reality of that statement hit Marcus like cold water. He'd stopped the descent, yes, but they were still in mortal danger. Both pilots were still unconscious. They were still miles from any airport, still flying a damaged aircraft with asymmetric flap deployment, still dependent on a 15-year-old boy who'd never felt actual sky beneath real wings. Marcus, I need you to take a breath, Sarah said, as if she could sense his rising panic through the radio. I've been a controller for 18 years. I've talked pilots through engine failures, landing gear malfunctions, even a complete electrical failure once. You are going to be okay. We are going to get you on the ground safely, but I need you calm and focused. Understand? Yes, ma'am. Marcus wiped sweat from his forehead with a shaking hand. Good, now tell me about yourself. What simulator do you use? The question surprised him. X-Plane 12, Professional Edition. That's a serious simulator. How long have you been flying it? 4 years. Mostly the 737-800, this exact model. And you said you know the systems. Yes, ma'am. I've studied the FCOM, the Flight Crew Operations Manual. I know the electrical system, hydraulics, flight controls, engines, fuel, navigation, everything. The words tumbled out faster now. I've practiced every emergency procedure. Engine fire, hydraulic failure, electrical smoke, rapid decompression, wind shear recovery. Marcus, Sarah interrupted gently, I believe you. And right now that knowledge makes you the most qualified person on that airplane to fly it. Not the most experienced, but the most qualified in this moment. Do you understand the difference? Marcus thought about it. In the cabin behind him were probably businessmen with MBAs, doctors with decades of medical training, engineers who built complex machines, but none of them knew how to fly. Knowledge without experience was better than experience without knowledge, or no knowledge at all. I understand, he said. Good. Now, let's talk about what happens next. You're currently at 12,100 feet, heading roughly east. We need to get you turned around and lined up for Grand Junction Regional Airport. It's the closest airport with a runway long enough for a 737, about 47 miles northwest of your current position. Marcus pulled up the mental map he'd flown so many times. Grand Junction. He'd landed there dozens of times in his simulator, usually practicing mountain approaches. Runway 1129, 10,501 feet long, plenty of room even for a sloppy landing. I know that airport, he said. Of course you do. He could hear the smile in Sarah's voice. Now here's what we're going to do. Very slowly, very carefully, we're going to use the autopilot to turn you around. Then we're going to descend you gradually to a safe approach altitude. Then when you're ready, and only when you're ready, we're going to talk you through landing. One step at a time. No rush. We have plenty of fuel. Understand? Yes, ma'am. You keep calling me ma'am. My name is Sarah. Use it. I'm your co-pilot now, Marcus. We're a team. Something about that, the informal connection, the human touch, made Marcus's eyes sting with tears. He blinked them back furiously. Okay, Sarah. That's better. Now, let's bring this bird home. Find your heading, select knob on the autopilot panel. Marcus located it, a small rotating knob just below the autopilot mode selector. Got it. What's your current heading? Marcus checked the heading indicator, 95 degrees. And we need to turn you to heading 310 to point you at Grand Junction. That's a 215-degree turn to the left. We're going to do this very gently using the autopilot. Turn the heading knob counterclockwise and watch your heading bug move on the compass display. Marcus turned the knob. On the primary flight display, a small magenta triangle, the heading bug began rotating counterclockwise around the compass rose. How far should I turn it? Marcus asked. All the way to 310. Don't worry, the autopilot will make a gentle standard rate turn. You won't lose control. Marcus kept turning the knob until the heading bug aligned with 310 degrees. Then he pressed the heading select button. Immediately, he felt the aircraft bank gently to the left. The turn coordinator showed a perfect standard rate turn, 3 degrees per second. Smooth, controlled, exactly like it should be. Through the windscreen, Marcus watched the desert horizon tilt. Mountains appeared in the distance, their peaks dusted with early snow. The late morning sun blazed through the cockpit windows, making him squint. We're turning, Marcus reported, banking about 15 degrees left. Beautiful, you're a natural, Marcus. He wasn't a natural. He was terrified, exhausted, running on pure adrenaline. But Sarah's confidence was contagious. If she believed he could do this, maybe, just maybe, he could. The plane continued its gentle turn, the autopilot doing exactly what it was designed to do, make flying easier, safer, more predictable. Marcus watched the heading tick upward, 105, 120, 150, 180. Sarah, Marcus said quietly, I'm here. What if I can't land it? What if I crash? There was a pause. Then Sarah's voice came back, absolutely certain. Then you crash trying and no one will fault you for that. But Marcus, you're not going to crash, I won't let you. How can you be so sure? Because I've been listening to you for the past 5 minutes and you know what I hear. I hear a pilot. You read instruments like you've been doing it for years. You respond to commands correctly. You stay calm under pressure. That's not luck. That's training. Your training might be different, but it's real. The heading indicator crossed 270 degrees, almost there. Besides, Sarah added, you've got something most pilots don't have. What's that? You've got nothing to lose and everything to prove. That's a powerful combination. Marcus thought about his father's words, a waste of time, his teacher's disappointment, every person who'd ever dismissed his passion as just a game, just pixels, just meaningless fun. They were about to find out just how meaningful 3,247 hours could be. The heading indicator settled on 310 degrees. The plane's wings leveled. Ahead, somewhere beyond the windscreen and 47 miles of empty air, Grand Junction Regional Airport waited. Marcus Chen, 15 years old, was going home. If he could figure out how to get there alive, 47 miles had never felt so far. Marcus stared at the navigation display, watching the small airplane icon crawl toward Grand Junction. At their current speed of 285 knots, they'd reach the airport in less than 10 minutes. 10 minutes between now and the moment of truth. 10 minutes until he had to prove whether 3,247 hours in a simulator meant anything at all. His hands hadn't stopped shaking since he'd sat down in the captain's seat. Every few seconds, he wiped his palms on his jeans, but they were immediately slick with sweat again. The cockpit felt like a sauna despite the air conditioning running at full blast. Marcus, how are you doing up there? Sarah's voice remained steady, a constant anchor in the chaos. Scared, he admitted, really scared. Good, fear keeps you sharp. Overconfidence kills pilots. She paused. Talk to me about your simulator training. Walk me through your typical landing procedure. Marcus recognized what she was doing, keeping him engaged, keeping his mind active, preventing panic from taking root. It was working. I always start at 10,000 feet, he began, his voice growing steadier as he fell into familiar territory. Configure for approach speed, usually around 140 knots for landing weight. Deploy flaps in stages, 5 degrees, then 10, then 15, then full at 30 degrees. Landing gear down at 5 miles out. Final approach speed of roughly 135 to 145 knots depending on weight. What about the runway? Aim for the first third. Touch down on the main gear first, then lower the nose wheel gently. Deploy spoilers immediately, apply reverse thrust, then brake progressively. If anything feels wrong, go around and try again. Except you can't go around, Sarah said quietly. The words hit Marcus like a punch. She was right. In his simulator, he'd aborted hundreds of landings, pulled up, added power, circled back for another attempt. But Flight 447 was running on limited fuel after burning through reserves during the emergency. The pilots had been unconscious for almost an hour. They had one shot, one chance to get this right. No, Marcus whispered, I can't go around. Behind him, Jennifer Rodriguez had returned to the cockpit doorway. She'd been updating the passengers every few minutes, keeping them informed, keeping panic at bay. Now she stood silent, watching Marcus with an expression that mixed hope and terror in equal measure. Marcus, she said softly, Captain Williams is breathing better now. We got him on oxygen, but he's still not conscious. Neither is the first officer. Marcus nodded, not trusting himself to speak. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him like a physical force. These weren't NPCs in a game. These were real people with real families, real dreams, real lives that would end if he failed. Through the cockpit windows, the landscape had changed. They'd left the flat Nevada desert behind and were approaching the Colorado border. The Rocky Mountains loomed ahead, their peaks touching the clouds, beautiful and utterly unforgiving. Sarah, I need to descend, Marcus said, checking the navigation display. We're 32 miles out and still at 12,000 feet. Copy that. Let's bring you down to 8,000 feet. That'll put you at the right altitude for your approach. Find the altitude select window on your autopilot panel. Marcus located it, a small digital display showing 12,100. His finger hovered over the selector knob. Turn it counterclockwise to 8,000, then press the altitude select button. Marcus turned the knob, watching the numbers scroll down, 11,000, 10,000, 9,000, 8,000. He pressed the button. The nose pitched down gently. The vertical speed indicator showed a comfortable 1,500 feet per minute descent. The autopilot was doing its job perfectly, making everything smooth and controlled. But Marcus knew the autopilot couldn't land the plane. That final approach, that moment when rubber met runway, would be all manual, all him, his hands, his judgment, his skill, or lack thereof. 28 miles out, Sarah announced. Marcus, I need you to start thinking about your approach speed. What's your current weight estimate? This was where simulator experience became crucial. Marcus thought through the math. Boeing 737-800 empty weight around 91,000 pounds, plus fuel, plus passengers, plus cargo. Approximately 140,000 pounds, he estimated. Good, that means approach speed of 138 knots, landing speed around 132 knots. Remember those numbers. Marcus repeated them like a mantra. 138 approach, 132 landing. His mother's face flashed through his mind. She was back in the cabin, probably terrified, probably praying to every god she could think of. She'd trusted him, told him to save them. What if he couldn't? What if his last words to her were a promise he couldn't keep? Marcus, stay with me. Sarah's voice cut through his spiraling thoughts. I can hear you thinking too much. One step at a time. Right now, just fly the airplane. The landing comes later. Right, one step at a time. The airplane descended through 10,000 feet. Out the window, Grand Junction appeared in the distance, a sprawl of buildings nestled in a valley, the airport visible as a gray rectangle on the outskirts. So close, so impossibly far. 20 miles out, Sarah said. Time to configure for landing. Marcus, this is important. We're going to extend your flaps gradually. Too fast and you could stall. Too slow and you'll come in too hot. Ready. Ready. Find your flap lever. It's between the pilot seats, near the throttle quadrant. Marcus's hand found it immediately, muscle memory from 1,000 virtual approaches. The lever had detents at 0, 1, 2, 5, 10, 15, 25, 30, and 40 degrees. I've got it. Move it to position 1. That's 5 degrees. Marcus moved the lever. He felt the aircraft's configuration change, a slight rumble, a subtle shift in aerodynamics. The airspeed began to decrease. Flaps 5, Marcus confirmed. Good, how does she feel? Stable. Speed is decreasing to 245 knots. Perfect. Reduce your throttle slightly to maintain 200 knots. Marcus's left hand found the throttle levers. 2 of them, one for each engine, smooth and cool under his palm. He pulled back gently, feeling the engine spool down. The plane slowed, 245 knots, 2302 15200. Speed is 200 knots, Marcus reported. Excellent, flaps to 10 degrees. Marcus moved the lever to the next position. Another rumble, more drag. The nose wanted to pitch down, but the autopilot compensated automatically. 15 miles out, Sarah said. You're doing beautifully, Marcus. Better than some licensed pilots I've worked with. The compliment felt surreal. An hour ago, he'd been just another passenger. Now he was flying a crippled airliner toward a landing that would either be his greatest triumph or his final mistake. Reduce speed to 180 knots and extend flaps to 15 degrees. Marcus complied, his hands moving with increasing confidence. The airplane responded exactly as his simulator had taught him. Every input produced the expected result. Maybe, just maybe, this would work. 10 miles out, Sarah announced. Marcus, we need to talk about something important. The serious tone in her voice made his stomach clench. What? Your asymmetric flap deployment. The left wing has more flap extension than the right. It's going to affect your landing. The plane will want to roll left as you slow down. You'll need to compensate with aileron and rudder. Marcus's mind raced. Asymmetric flaps. He'd practiced this scenario exactly twice in his simulator, and he'd crashed both times before finally finding a YouTube tutorial from a real 737 pilot explaining the technique. I remember, he said. Counter with right aileron, right rudder to keep the nose straight. Exactly. It's going to take muscle, real physical effort. The controls will fight you. Can you do it? Marcus looked at his thin arms, his teenager's hands that had only ever gripped a plastic game controller. Could he overpower the hydraulics of a 140,000-pound aircraft? He thought of his mother, his sister, Nai waiting for them at home, the 145 other souls in the cabin behind him. I can do it, he said. Then let's bring this bird home. Landing gear down, it's time. Marcus reached for the landing gear lever, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might explode. 7 miles to the runway. 7 miles between life and death. 7 miles to prove that dreams could be real enough to save the world. The landing gear lever felt heavier than it should have. Marcus gripped it with both hands and pulled down. A deep mechanical grinding echoed through the airframe, a sound he'd never heard in his simulator, only read about in technical manuals. The nose gear deployed first, then the main gear trucks. Green lights illuminated on the panel, 3 perfect circles confirming all gear were down and locked. Gear down, 3 green, Marcus announced, his voice barely steady. Beautiful, Sarah replied. 5 miles out, flaps to 25 degrees, speed 160 knots. Marcus moved the flap lever again. The aircraft shuddered as more surface area extended into the airstream. He felt the asymmetry immediately. The left wing wanted to drop, to roll the aircraft into a spiral. His right hand tightened on the yoke, applying opposite aileron pressure. "The roll is strong," Marcus said through clenched teeth. "Fight it, don't let her get away from you." Through the windscreen, Grand Junction Airport filled his vision. The runway stretched out like a gray scar across the brown earth, 501 feet of concrete that represented salvation or disaster. Fire trucks lined both sides, red lights flashing, ambulances, emergency vehicles forming a corridor of hope. 4 miles, disconnect autopilot, your hand flying from here. Marcus's thumb found the autopilot disconnect button on the yoke. This was it. No more computer assistance. No more automated safety net. Just him, the controls, and physics. He pressed the button. The autopilot disconnected with a sharp chime. Instantly, Marcus felt the full weight of the aircraft in his hands. The yoke was alive, fighting him, responding to every air current and control surface deflection. The asymmetric flaps pulled harder to the left. His arms burned with the effort of holding wings level. "I've got it," Marcus said, though he wasn't sure he believed it. 3 miles, final flaps, 30 degrees, speed 145 knots. Marcus's left hand moved to the flap lever one last time. This was the maximum flap extension, full landing configuration. The drag would be immense. The asymmetry would be at its worst. He pulled the lever. The aircraft bucked like a living thing. The left wing dropped sharply. Warning horns blared. The bank angle increased, 5 degrees, 10 degrees, 15. "MARCUS," Sarah's voice cut through the chaos. Marcus hauled on the yoke with everything he had, right aileron input maxed out. His feet slammed the right rudder pedal, using his body weight to overcome the hydraulic pressure. The nose swung right. The wings slowly, agonizingly, began to level. Sweat poured into his eyes. His arms screamed. The yoke shook so violently he thought it might tear free from the column. "Level," he gasped. "Wings level." 2 miles. You're aligned with runway 11. Speed 142 knots, a little fast. Reduce power. Marcus's shaking left hand found the throttles. He pulled back, feeling the engine spool down. The airspeed decreased. 140,138, 136 knots. The runway was huge now, filling the entire windscreen. He could see individual markings, the numbers painted white, 11. Could see the touchdown zone markings. Could see exactly where he needed to put this wounded bird down. 1 mile. Speed 136 knots. Altitude 500 feet. Looking good, Marcus. Start your flare at 50 feet. Marcus's eyes locked on the altitude. 450 feet. 400. 350. In the cabin behind him, passengers had gone completely silent. No crying. No praying. Just the terrible, beautiful silence of 147 people holding their collective breath. His mother was back there, trusting him, believing in him. 300 feet. The asymmetric flaps pulled harder as airspeed decreased. Marcus's right arm felt like it was on fire. The yoke demanded constant, unwavering pressure. 1 second of weakness and they'd roll left, wing would hit first, cartwheel, explode. Don't think about it, fly the airplane. 200 feet. The ground rushed up. Details became visible, sagebrush, tire marks on the runway, a bird scattering from the approach path. Everything was happening so fast and so slow simultaneously. Sarah's voice was absolutely calm. 100 feet, you're doing perfect, start thinking about your flare. 75 feet. Marcus could see the faces of firefighters on the ground, looking up, waiting, hopping, praying he didn't turn their airport into a fireball. 50 feet. Flare. Marcus pulled back gently, let her settle. Marcus began pulling back on the yoke. The nose lifted. The descent rate decreased, but the asymmetry was fighting him, the left wing still trying to drop. 30 feet. Too fast. He was coming in too fast. The runway was racing beneath them at 136 knots when it should be 132. 4 knots. Just 4 knots too fast. In a simulator, you'd go around. In reality. 20 feet. You've got this, Sarah whispered, just like you practiced. 10 feet. Marcus pulled back more. The stall warning chirped too slow, but he needed to arrest the descent, needed to float just above the runway, needed to. The main gear kissed concrete with a bang that rattled every rivet in the airframe. Not a gentle touchdown, not a textbook landing, but they were down. The asymmetric flaps immediately tried to weathervane the aircraft left. The nose started swinging. Marcus's feet danced on the rudder pedals, right foot mashed to the floor, fighting to keep the nose aligned with the runway centerline. Spoilers, deploy spoilers, Sarah commanded. Marcus's hand shot to the spoiler lever, pulling it up. The wing spoilers deployed, killing lift, planting the aircraft firmly on the runway. Reverse thrust. The throttles had reverse thrust locks. Marcus grabbed them, pulled up, then shoved forward. The engines roared, screaming in reverse, decelerating the massive aircraft. But they were still going 120 knots, and the left main gear was smoking, and the nose was still trying to swing left toward the fire trucks. Brakes, Marcus, maximum braking. Marcus stomped both feet on the brake pedals at the top of the rudder pedals. Anti-skid systems engaged. All 12 wheels locked up and released and locked up again in rapid succession. The smell of burning rubber filled the cockpit. The runway markings blurred past, 9,000 feet remaining, 7,000, 5,000. The nose was swinging left despite everything. 40 degrees off centerline now, 50 degrees. They were going to leave the runway. Marcus stood on the right brake, applying differential braking. The right main gear dug in. The left side kept rolling. The plane began to straighten. 3,000 feet remaining, 2,000. The speed dropped 100 knots, 80, 60. The nose finally aligned with the centerline. The smoking wheels gripped properly. The aircraft shuddered and slowed. 40 knots, 30, 20. And then, impossibly, miraculously, they stopped. Flight 447 sat in the middle of runway 11, trailing smoke from tortured tires, surrounded by emergency vehicles racing toward them with sirens wailing. But they were stopped, they were down, they were alive. Marcus couldn't move. His hands were locked on the controls in a death grip. His entire body shook uncontrollably. He tried to speak, but no sound came out. Behind him, the cabin erupted. Screaming, not terror this time, but pure, unfiltered joy. Crying, laughing, applause that sounded like thunder. People shouting, praising God, praising Marcus, praising the universe that had granted them impossible mercy. Jennifer Rodriguez grabbed Marcus from behind, sobbing into his shoulder. "You did it. Oh my God, you did it." The radio crackled. Flight 447, Grand Junction Tower. That was the most incredible thing I've ever seen. Welcome home, kid. And Sarah's voice, thick with emotion. "Marcus Chen, you are one hell of a pilot." Marcus finally managed to speak, his voice cracking. "I need my mom." "She's coming, sweetheart," Jennifer said through tears. "She's coming right now." And then his mother was there, squeezing into the cockpit, pulling him into her arms, both of them crying and laughing and shaking. "My baby," Linda whispered. "My brave, brilliant baby." Marcus buried his face in her shoulder and let himself break down, all the fear and adrenaline and terror pouring out in great, heaving sobs. Outside, firefighters reached the aircraft. EMTs rushed aboard. The world descended into organized chaos. But in that moment, in his mother's arms, Marcus Chen felt something he'd never experienced before. He felt like a pilot. The EMTs had to pry Marcus's hands off the control yoke. His fingers had locked in position, muscles cramped from the sustained effort of fighting asymmetric flaps for those final terrifying minutes. A paramedic named Rodriguez, no relation to Jennifer, gently massaged his hands while checking his vital signs. "Heart rate's 168, Rodriguez said, shaking his head in amazement. "Kid, you just aged about 10 years in the last hour." Marcus couldn't respond. He sat in the captain's seat, wrapped in a shock blanket despite the warm Colorado afternoon, watching through the windscreen as the organized chaos unfolded. Fire trucks surrounded the aircraft. EMTs rushed up the mobile stairs that had been wheeled to the forward door. News helicopters circled overhead like vultures, except these vultures were broadcasting hope instead of tragedy. Captain Williams regained consciousness first. Marcus watched as they wheeled him past the cockpit on a stretcher, oxygen mask covering his face. The captain's eyes found Marcus and widened. He tried to say something, pulling the mask aside, but the EMTs wouldn't let him. Instead, he raised one trembling hand in a salute. Marcus's throat tightened. He managed a small nod in return. First Officer Davis woke up 10 minutes later, confused and disoriented. "What happened?" Marcus heard him asking. "Did we land? How did we land?" Jennifer Rodriguez, still tear-stained but composed again, leaned down and whispered something to Davis. His eyes went huge. He turned his head, searching until he spotted Marcus. The look on the young first officer's face, pure disbelief mixed with profound gratitude, was something Marcus would remember for the rest of his life. "Sir," Marcus called out as they wheeled Davis toward the door, "you left the parking brake off." It was a joke, a stupid pilot joke he'd heard in a simulator forum. Davis stared at him for a moment, then burst out laughing, which turned into coughing, which made the EMTs scold both of them. But Marcus smiled. His first real pilot joke in a real cockpit after a real landing. Linda Chen refused to leave her son's side. She sat on the floor of the cockpit, holding his hand, occasionally touching his face as if to confirm he was real and whole and alive. She hadn't spoken much, just whispered, "I'm so proud of you," over and over until the words lost meaning and became simply a rhythm of love. The passengers deplaned slowly, reverently. Many stopped at the cockpit door to look at Marcus. Some cried. Some tried to speak but couldn't. An elderly man, the one who'd scoffed earlier, who'd called it a video game, approached with tears streaming down his wrinkled face. "I'm sorry," the man said, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry I doubted you. You saved my life. You saved all of us." He pulled out his wallet with shaking hands. "I have grandchildren, 5 of them. Because of you I get to see them again. Thank you, thank you." He pressed something into Marcus's hand, a business card and what felt like money. Marcus tried to refuse, but the man was already walking away, shoulders shaking with sobs. Marcus looked at the card. Harold Chen, retired Colonel, U.S. Air Force. The same last name. The money was a check for $10,000 with a note scrawled on the memo line, "For flight school." "Mom," Marcus whispered, showing her the check. Linda stared at it, then started crying again. 3 days later. The hospital conference room was packed with reporters. Camera flashes made Marcus squint. Microphones bristled like porcupine quills from every direction. He sat between his mother and Captain Williams, who'd been released that morning with a clean bill of health. The investigation had revealed everything. A manufacturing defect in the cockpit oxygen system had allowed contaminated air into the supply line. Both pilots had been slowly poisoned over the course of an hour before finally losing consciousness. The asymmetric flap deployment had been caused by a secondary hydraulic failure triggered during Marcus's initial control inputs. Not his fault, the investigators stressed, just catastrophically bad luck. "Marcus," a reporter called out, "how does it feel to be a hero?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably. He'd heard that word 100 times in the past 72 hours. It didn't feel real. Heroes were soldiers and firefighters and doctors. He was just a kid who'd played too many video games. "I don't feel like a hero," Marcus said honestly. "I feel like I got really lucky that my weird obsession happened to be useful." Captain Williams leaned toward his microphone. "Let me say something about this young man." His voice was still rough from the oxygen deprivation. "I've been flying for 34 years. I've landed 737s in hurricanes, with engine failures, with every imaginable malfunction. What Marcus did, taking an aircraft he'd never touched before, fighting asymmetric control surfaces, managing a damaged hydraulic system, and landing safely on his first try." Williams paused, emotion thick in his voice. "That's not luck, that's skill, that's knowledge, that's courage. I'm alive because Marcus Chen is a pilot. He may not have a license yet, but make no mistake, he's a pilot." The room erupted with questions. Marcus caught fragments. "Will you pursue aviation? What about college? Movie deals? Book offers?" But Marcus's attention was drawn to the back of the room, where a man in an American Airlines captain's uniform stood watching. The man caught Marcus's eye and nodded slowly, respect clear on his weathered face. Real recognition from a real pilot. That meant more than any headline. 6 months later, Marcus adjusted his headset and scanned the instrument panel of the Cessna 172. Beside him, in the instructor's seat, Captain Williams smiled. "Ready for your first solo flight?" Williams asked. Marcus's hands trembled slightly on the yoke, not from fear this time, but from excitement. Real flight training had been nothing like the simulator. The Cessna was smaller, simpler, more intimate. Every bump of turbulence felt personal. Every landing was a negotiation with gravity that he could feel in his bones. The media frenzy had eventually faded. The talk shows and interviews had slowed. Life had returned to something approaching normal, except nothing was normal anymore. Marcus had been offered scholarships from 6 different flight schools. American Airlines had created an endowment in his name for aspiring young pilots. His simulator setup at home gathered dust, replaced by real flight hours at the local airport. His father had called once, wanting to reconnect now that Marcus was famous. Marcus had politely declined. Some bridges weren't worth rebuilding. But Nai had held on long enough to see her grandson on television, landing that impossible airplane. She'd cried and called him her little miracle in Mandarin before passing away peacefully 2 weeks later. Marcus kept her photo taped to his flight bag. "Marcus," Williams prompted, "you ready?" Marcus thought about that terrifying hour at 30,000 feet. Thought about 148 people trusting him with their lives. Thought about his father's dismissal and his teacher's disappointment, and everyone who'd ever said his passion was a waste of time. He thought about the sky, vast and beautiful and terrifying, and home. "I'm ready," Marcus said. He advanced the throttle. The Cessna accelerated down the runway, and for the second time in his life, Marcus Chen felt the magical moment when wheels left Earth and he climbed toward the clouds. But this time there was no emergency, no terror, no lives hanging in the balance. Just a boy and a dream and the infinite sky. As he climbed through 1,000 feet, Marcus keyed his radio. "Santa Monica Tower, Cessna 738 Charlie Mike. Thanks for the clearance. It's good to be flying." The controller's response came back warm. "Roger, 738 Charlie Mike. The sky suits you, kid." Marcus smiled and banked gently toward the ocean, sunlight glinting off the wings. His father had been wrong. His teacher had been wrong. Everyone who dismissed his simulator obsession had been wrong. It hadn't been a waste of time. It had been preparation for the moment when the world needed someone who lived in the clouds. It had been training for the day when an ordinary boy would have to do something extraordinary. It had been the first chapter of a story that was just beginning. Below him, Lowe's angels stretched out in all directions, millions of people living ordinary lives, unaware that somewhere above them flew a 15-year-old boy who discovered a profound truth. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to give up on what you love, even when the world tells you it's foolish. Sometimes courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being terrified and doing it anyway. And sometimes, just sometimes, the quiet kid in the corner with the useless hobby turns out to be exactly what the world needs. Marcus climbed toward the clouds, toward his future, toward everything he'd ever dreamed. And the sky, vast and beautiful and finally truly his, welcomed him home. The end.